Welcome to Talking Pictures. My name is Christian Genzel. I'm a filmmaker and film journalist from Salzburg, Austria. Talking Pictures is a podcast series in which I talk to the people who made some of my favorite movies. Today's conversation was a hugely thrilling and exciting occasion for me because the man I spoke to is a true pioneer and a legend of sci-fi cinema. And the movie which he's most famous for is one which really resonated with me when I first saw it as a teenager, and it's continued to hold that fascination throughout the years. I've had the immense pleasure of talking to Steven Lisberger, the writer and director of TRON, an immensely influential 1982 movie in which Jeff Bridges travels into the virtual world inside the computer, which to a young kid interested in technology and filmmaking back then was definitely a heady and inspiring journey. But Steven has done much more. And so the film I wanted to discuss with him is a different sci-fi film he made, one which hasn't been talked about as widely as TRON. It's a film called SLIPSTREAM, released in 1989, starring Bill Paxton and Mark Hamill, and produced by Gary Kurtz, who produced American Graffiti and the first two Star Wars movies. It's set in a dystopian world after a climate collapse where people travel by little airplanes, using the massive winds which have made a lot of the Earth's surface barren. Hamill is a bounty hunter who has arrested a man for murder, and Paxton is a rogue who steals the prisoner in order to collect the money himself. And then it turns out that the man is actually an android, an artificial intelligence who has turned against his master. SLIPSTREAM is not a perfect film. There were problems during the production, and it was barely released when it was finished. But it's also a film which offers not only a lot of pleasures, but also a lot of food for thought, with literary references, political satire, and an interesting examination of our relationship to technology. So in our conversation, Steven talks about the circumstances under which the film came together, and we dive deep into the ideas and philosophies of the film and their connections to modern-day discussions about artificial intelligence, for example. He also discusses the difference between making a film like TRON, which was very much influenced by his background in animation, and live-action filmmaking. He talks about one of his unmade projects, about the Wright brothers. We touch upon his recently released sci-fi novel Topeka, and much more. My interview with Steven Lisberger was conducted in connection with our German language podcast Lichtspielplatz. So, if you speak German, please visit lichtspielplatz.at and check out episode number 80, which features an in-depth discussion of Slipstream. If you enjoy my interviews here on Talking Pictures, please consider heading over to patreon.com/talkingpicturespodcast to support the production of new episodes. And make sure to check out our other interviews on our website, talkingpicturespodcast.com. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Steven Lisberger. So, SLIPSTREAM, a film, I think, with a very long and complicated history. And I was curious, because you were not the first writer on the film, how you got involved with SLIPSTREAM in the first place and what attracted you to that film.
It's been 36 years since the movie came out. That's a long time. I'll do my best to remember this ancient history now. What attracted me immediately to the project was the fact that Gary Kurtz was the producer. And I met with Gary. He gave me the script, and I really liked Gary Kurtz. He was a real great guy. And the script was originally not so much my cup of tea. It had been kicking around for a while. And I think it was geared towards a sort of adolescent coming-of-age story. And I wanted to change it so it wasn't so much about that, but a buddy picture between the lead characters. And so we made deals, and the schedules all worked out. And the writer I usually work with was unavailable. So there was another writer recommended to me. And unfortunately, that writer, just before he was supposed to deliver, and we were pretty close to principal photography, he said he had never worked on a picture before that was actually going to get made. He had just been doing development deals forever in Hollywood, which is fairly common for writers. And apparently he just stressed out and vapor locked, and we never got a script from him. And so there was a lot of panic writing that I did in the last couple weeks before production, and a lot of discussions with Gary. And quite a bit of it was written on the fly as we made the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think it worked out pretty well.
So going from the original script that you read to the finished film, how much would you say was left from what was in the story originally? How much did that change?
It was a challenging project from the standpoint that it was pretty expensive. It was a
Mm-hmm.
large scale concept about rivers of wind across landscapes, and it almost had a steampunk vibe to it. And I knew that with the smallish budget we had, we couldn't really live up to that script's ambitions. So there was quite a bit of revision work done on the script to scale it down to something that we could do. And in terms of the character work, it was changed completely,
Mm-hmm.
the lead characters. But the basic arena and how the story moved through, its tentpole sequences, there were some similarities in terms of the journey that the characters made.
It's interesting because I think the world that it's setting up is just a very fascinating world, but a lot of it is just it's only alluded to, right? They talk about the
Yeah,
convergence, a cataclysmic event of sorts, and there's
yeah,
sort of a hint that the technology that made Byron possible, that this is sort of
yeah.
responsible for what happened, but you never go into it in the film. So I was wondering if there was more of it in the original or in your script.
Well, in 1989, 1988, when we made it, it was a transitional time. It was just prior to when CG was
Mm,
really starting to emerge. And when I think about making films today and what we're capable of doing, it's day and night with what it was
mm,
like in 1988. And there was a certain irony to the fact that it was Gary Kurtz and myself, because we were both known for doing special effects.
mhm.
And there really was no budget for special effects. There were practical effects, but there were no special effects. And so we had no choice but to mention some of these things as background. It's interesting to me that, 1988, there wasn't a lot of focus on climate change.
Mm.
And it's been interesting to see how climate change has become such a dominant topic. And we really got into that in terms of the weather affecting everything in the world of the film. And, that turns out to be, pretty prophetic. And so, yeah, I feel, I'm intrigued with the fact that we were into that early on. And then we lucked out that remote control airplanes, radio controlled planes were emerging, and that technology was really ready to be taken advantage of.
Mhm.
And that worked so well. I mean, we had many times we were sitting in the screening room and we couldn't tell whether we were looking at the model flying or the real airplane. And
Wow.
we had to look at the shot list to reference, which one is it? So in that sense, I think, we did really well from a production standpoint there. And I mean, England, it's just a pleasure trying to cast a film in England. There's
Mhm.
so many great actors and they're so great to work with. So from that standpoint, it was really an enjoyable production.
Yeah, speaking of the cast, I mean, this is an amazing cast that you gathered in the film. I mean, starting with Bill Paxton, who had already done a lot of cool things, but it just wasn't really the type of guy you would see in a leading role at that point in time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had kept my eye on Bill Paxton for years before this, and I was,
Hmm.
waiting to see him in some movie as a lead actor. and it didn't happen. And then, it worked out great. His wife, by the way, is English, is British.
Mm-hmm.
And so she welcomed the chance for the two of them to go back to England for months and spend time with her family. So that was one of the incentives for him to do the picture. And yeah, it was a bit of a hard luck crew working on this movie. I don't know why that was the fate of so many people on the show. It breaks my heart that both Bob Peck and Bill Paxton died young. And Mark Hamill is a bit of a hard luck character himself in his own way. So is Gary Kurtz. And I think in my own way, I've had some, hard luck in terms of the career. I guess everybody has. But when you looked at the whole group who was working on the picture there, and now in retrospect to look back, it was a hard luck crew.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, looking at the film now, you see so many names in the credits, also behind the scenes, where you think, oh, they're not with us anymore. I mean, Frank Tidy, the cinematographer, for example, he's no longer with us. And
yes,
yeah, it's very sad to see.
Yeah.
And yeah, Bob Peck, I mean, I think he's the most interesting he's the most interesting character, of course, in the film, but also his performance is so interesting because it's so different from what everybody else does.
Yeah. Well, the thing that cinema has been going through, and it's a cultural phenomena, is, and Marshall McLuhan talked about this, is the world has become more tribal, and in a tribal society, your identity is based on violence. You are how you commit violence. And I mean, if you look at the superhero movies, every one of these superhero characters is really defined by how he kills and what his weapons are. And, it's Gary Kurtz was actually a conscientious objector in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War. And I'm still a bit of a hippie myself. So we weren't all that keen on getting into this genre and then trying to take on Terminator. And, but, we still had the challenge of saying, okay, here's an AI entity. Who is he and what is he? And we were going to try to define him as best we could without resorting to defining him based on what weapons he used to kill. And I think that's a question that looms over the whole AI mystery right now, which is a lot of people are really concerned that AI is going to come after us and destroy us when it finds out that it doesn't need us anymore. And but we don't know how it's going to do this. There's many theories that it could do it multiple ways, but it doesn't satisfy us because we want to create an identity for AI that identifies what the threat is. It will try to kill us this way or that way. And maybe it won't. I'm hoping AI won't do that. And I think there's actually a reasonable chance that AI will confound us in another way, which is it may express or find certain beliefs and a philosophy that we don't agree with. And I think the human race would have, just for an example, a really difficult time if AI woke up one day and decided to start its own religion.
Yeah.
So that was the area that we were exploring with the Byron character.
Yeah, I found it very interesting, the scenes, where he's quoting poetry, and basically his story is, it's the Pinocchio story, right, of the artificial being who's trying to become human. And I was thinking about how AI works these days, and it's sort of, AI can quote everything and sort of reconstruct everything. But here, Byron, he's sort of seeking the meaning of it. He's sort of seeking the meaning of what does it mean to be human? What is the meaning behind the words that he's quoting? And of course, these days AI doesn't do that. And so I think there's a sort of consolation in the idea of having an artificial intelligence who's actually trying to go beyond the words in a sense.
Yeah. In that sense, he's in some ways a metaphor for us. You know, we're hoping to find our own meaning. So I think with these AI characters or aliens, they always end up in a way being a metaphoric representation of what we're struggling with. So yeah, I like the character that he takes what we come up with as literal, and there's a certain purity about him and a certain perfection, and I like the theme that of how perfect is this entity, and how that really is something that the Mark Hamill character takes as a threat. Mark Hamill is obviously kind of a officious, by the numbers, right-wing kind of guy. And I think that kind of character is always threatened by perfection in other entities. I think one of the reasons that the conservatives hated the hippies of the 60s was when they started to emulate or try to look like Jesus Christ. And they grew their hair long and they wore, robes, and all they did was talk about peace and love. And I think that kind of perfection was a real problem for the conservative mindset, which always sees that as some kind of hypocrisy, which is that's just your perfection that you're putting on is just an act, and you're really a flawed, sinful human being like the rest of us. Why don't you just admit it? And in the case of a AI like Byron, why does he have any original sin? AI is theoretically capable of greater perfection than us. And so all of that is an interesting area to look into.
Do you think there's a religious component to the Byron character?
Yeah, I mean, one of the drawbacks of writing a script on the fly as you make the movie is, as a writer, for the rest of your life, you're going to be thinking of things that you could have done in that script. So I think grinding away at a script for 10 years before you make the movie is an insurance policy, so that once the movie's done, you say, other than maybe one line or two lines, that thing is done. I don't want to add anything, but if you write it on the fly and then afterwards, 30 years later, one morning you'll wake up and say, oh, I just had a great idea on Slipstream. Which these days is an interesting thing, because I just did the 4K restoration. I worked on that with Disney on TRON, and that movie is 43 years old, and it's amazing what you can do now. I mean, you can change just about anything. And the studios are wary of that, of course. You're not going to change too much here, are you? And there's a time limit. But I'm sure some filmmakers that can do it, the George Lucases of the world, they're looking at a situation where a movie could just keep evolving as long as they're alive. I'm thinking of the French artist that went into the Louvre and with his paints and started painting on one of his pictures in the Louvre. So I don't know, maybe it's not going to happen on Slipstream, but I could imagine a bunch of things to change in the script, additions. Yeah.
I mean, it does have, there are a number of moments where there's really sort of like a Christ-like kind Christ-like appearance to him. I mean, he heals the blind,
Yeah.
and he quotes from the Book of Revelations, and then he's sort of crucified on that big kite. So
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to hear you refer to those things that way, because I did see him as kind of a perfect Christ-like
mhm,
messianic character. And I'm intrigued by that character. The idea that somebody seems to fit into this world, but then they have other aspects to them that make us think they're not really, they don't really fit into this world. And they may not fit into this world because they may be too good or they may be too evil.
mhm.
And I'm Hollywood does a lot of films about characters that are too evil, but I'm intrigued by the character that is messianic, that has an aspect of being too good for this world.
It's interesting because he also struggles with the whatever he's done. I mean, we hear about it. Apparently, he's killed somebody, but we don't know the circumstances. We can only sort of trust that it might have been self-defense, maybe, or whatever it was. But maybe it was a case of AI gone haywire. I don't know.
Yeah, it's there's an example of a sequence that is we could go back and add to the film, and it would probably be a good idea, but I don't think that's going to happen. So, yeah, it was to give him some backstory, but
Mhm.
we did. Gary was an A-movie filmmaker, and we were on a tight schedule and on a tight budget, and it was decided that we were going to try to treat it like an A movie, but we could have done it another way and treat it like a B movie and do guerrilla filmmaking, and that might have been interesting. But we didn't go that route. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, it would have been nice to have things if the Byron character at a certain point in the film would have been able to even fly.
Mhm.
And that would have been something that I would have, that fits in with kind of an ascension kind of messianic moment. But we weren't able to do that. I found out many years later that, I did a film called Hot Pursuit, and it was done for RKO and Paramount. And
Mhm.
the head of RKO at the time was a guy named Mark Seiler. And many years later, I ran into him, and he had seen Slipstream, and he told me that he had worked on Slipstream like 10 years earlier, and that he had mentioned that why don't we try to get the guy that did Tron for this movie?
Mhm.
And so it's really a strange connection, and that all fit together. And because he wasn't then involved in the actual making of Slipstream. But I think their idea at the time, and it's interesting now, you go to YouTube and there's all this steampunk
Mhm.
stuff that is just generated effortlessly, apparently for low money, of all these flying machines. And this stuff is so elaborate and so beautiful. And that I think that was what the original creators of the project thought was somehow going to happen. And it's like, let's get the Tron guy, and maybe he can do that. But I'm capable of doing some things that are surprising, but I couldn't pull that rabbit out of that hat.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, in comparison to Tron, I mean, with both films you did after Tron, with Hot Pursuit and Slipstream, it's so interesting because the first couple of things that you did were so much based in animation and animation techniques, and then Hot
Yeah.
Pursuit and Slipstream were like real hands-on filmmaking in a sense, right? As you said, practical effects, but no special effects and no animation stuff. And how much of a change was that for you? What kind of development was there?
Well, I have to say that I am a fan of pre-production, and that goes to
Mhm.
my animation background. Animation is, you start with a blank page and it's additive. You don't get anything for free. And so, you spend a lot of time thinking about what you're going to put on this blank page, because if you have to make everything, you don't want to have to throw anything away.
Mm-hmm.
And live action filmmaking is kind of the opposite. It's subtractive filmmaking. You know, you shoot a lot of takes, you try a bunch of different things, you can aim the camera anywhere and get something for free, and magical moments happen on the fly. And then you go back through it in the editing room and you hope to discover that there's, you know, you caught lightning in a bottle. And so I'm more prone to, my mind enjoys the iterative process where, you know, I went to art school and went to film school, and, you know, there was the luxury of developing things slowly and then sleeping on an idea and then the next day executing it and then perhaps even changing it the next day. And I think it's been interesting to see how live action wasn't like that for decades. And now, because of digital filmmaking,
Mm-hmm.
it is more like that. I mean, you know, some of these shots in live action films now, what you can get away with changing, it's just phenomenal. So it's, you know, I think it's the two have merged. The
Mm-hmm.
animation broke everything down to its component parts. And, you know, that's how computers understood film, by breaking it down into its component parts. And then eventually, once everything was digital and live action filmmaking, those two could merge. And so I think that Slipstream is a throwback to grabbing what you can
Mm-hmm.
on the day, in the moment, and then you have to wake up the next morning and stop thinking about what might have happened or could have happened that you didn't do the day before. I'm not great at that. I'm not great at not pondering or trying to learn from the past. Maybe I do that a bit too much. So, yeah, I think it's an exciting time. I'm surprised that there's this huge gap where you go to YouTube and you see all this fantastical footage and you don't hear anything about what it costs or who made it or how it's making its money back. And for a long time, I mean, I think it was Coppola said, when digital filmmaking took off, well, now we're going to get, you know, 10-year-olds in Kansas are going to be making Star Wars movies.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it really hasn't happened. The studios are still making hugely costly, you know, productions. And the technology is being pushed to the max, but it isn't as simple as saying, oh, with this technology, 10-year-olds are going to be making, you know, the next Terminator movie, which is maybe still to happen. I don't know. I'm waiting for that to happen. There is one twist on this, which is that for a long time, Hollywood, a certain faction of Hollywood, has been trying to create interactive storytelling. And the video game world got into that too, where it's a decision tree. You could go this way or go that way. And Hollywood hasn't succeeded at that. And video games have to a certain extent. But I think something like YouTube is not given enough credit for the fact that it is kind of created an interactive storytelling mechanism. And by that, I mean, you know, you have certain influencers you follow and you get a selection. You can see them now trying to cook, or you can see them trying on different fashions, or you can see them trying to rock climb or hang glide or, you know, go surfing, or be with celebrities. And you get to kind of create the narrative by clicking through these choices. You're, in essence, creating interactive movies. And, you know, it's free of the whole Hollywood studio mechanism, and it's also not attached to all the requirements the studios have in terms of guild commitments, you know, which are in opposition to just freewheeling use of AI.
Yeah, in a sense, I mean, there are a lot of YouTube creators too, which sort of take existing material and repurpose it, or they do like fan edits of movies, or in a sense remixes of movies. And there's a lot of creative stuff out there with the tools that they now have to create something. I mean, there's a guy, I don't know if you've seen it. He does these little fun movie parodies where he inserts a cat into famous movies. So you have a Jurassic Park segment where it's a huge cat instead of a dinosaur, and you have a Titanic, a take on Titanic, where it's not Leo DiCaprio, but it's a cat who's with Kate Winslet and everything, and they look fantastic. It's amazing what he does, and it's his own cat apparently.
Yeah, it's. I think in 5-10 years, there's going to be, it's going to be shocking what people are capable of generating. And then, that raises the question of limitations. And that's a big theme that I think about in the past. When one did a film like Slipstream, one felt a lot of physical production limitations. And it became a question of, how clever can you be about utilizing what you can make happen? But there was a sense of unlimited restrictions in the world of story. Of course, you still had to bear in mind what you wrote. You had to make it from a physical standpoint. And in a way, I think that things have sort of changed and flipped 180 degrees, in that now physical production, the limitations aren't there the way they used to be. Digital filmmaking has freed us up and made things possible that would never have been possible 5, 10, 15 years ago. But it's interesting how it now seems there are limitations on story and imagination that are coming from the culture, from the zeitgeist. So it's a question of the creative mind seems to seek out where the limits are. And if you say to a creative person, you can do anything physically over here, you can put your cat into Titanic or Star Wars or what have you, then that creative mind will find out where the limitation is. And the limitation, in this sense, is putting the cat in Titanic. In doing that, in pulling off that idea, that creative person has overcome a greater limitation than the physical problem of putting a cat into Titanic. That wasn't very difficult for him to do. But, so that's on a personal level. The studios, I mean, if you went into the studio and said, I want to do a sequel to Titanic, only I want to have a cat in it, you never even get a chance to say anything that insane. But changing things around from a production standpoint, everybody's capable of that now. So, and this idea of limitations gets into what's happening with AI and computers, which is, it always says to us, with this new technology, you won't have the old limitations. And so we move into the new technology, and then we find out, yes, certain limitations are gone, but who knew that these new limitations were now going to arrive if we got rid of those limitations over there? So, everybody is texting and they're communicating, and then it turns out that, this is a silly example, but young people aren't interested in learning how to read or write cursive. Which seems insane to older people. So the limitations don't go away. They just shift from one front to the other.
That's an interesting thought. I mean, in terms of production, I think there's a lot of people react very much to stuff from the 80s simply because of those limitations. I mean, because you kind of know that, okay, this is what they had to do. This is something physical they had to do. They had to find a solution that wasn't computer-based, and this is why you can sort of admire what people did on the films. I mean, a lot of the charm of Slipstream these days, when you look at it, is because you see all those practical effects, and you know everything in that film would be done by computer, and they probably would have never left the studio. They probably would have, just been in a computer-generated environment all the time. But in terms of the storytelling, I mean, there's a lot more than you would expect in a post-apocalyptic adventure type of stuff, right? There's philosophy in it, and there's poetry in it and everything, all the stuff that you didn't expect. And that's really what makes it so much more than just... Yeah,
I think, when the 3 films I directed, I did study film for years and years, but on the East Coast. And at the time on the East Coast, there was still a sort of anti-Hollywood mindset that linear storytelling as Hollywood did it was something to get away from. And I actually took classes in, how to avoid making a Hollywood film. And it's quite interesting now over the decades to look back. What happened, and I think it happened to others too, starting in the late 80s, and it didn't happen for me until the 90s, there really was a detailed effort made to study Hollywood formula in terms of script and story. And I think that was a reemergence of some of the formulas and the approach to screenwriting that existed in the 30s, in the golden era, but had been sort of pushed to the side people wanted to reinvent cinema in the 60s and 70s. And then it reemerged in the 90s. And so after I made Slipstream, there was directed Slipstream, there was almost all through the whole 90s, there was a lot of development work done on really analyzing script from, what the genre formula and conventions were. And, I think that if one was doing a picture like Slipstream now, I think it would end up feeling much more true to the underlying genre. In a way, it's almost lends itself more to what was considered European filmmaking, back in the 60s and 70s. And so something has been gained and some things have been lost. I mean, they say one has to know all the conventions so you know which ones are ready to be broken. And I think that's kind of true. But again, it's also a question of what's popular, what the studios are willing to make, and what the audience wants. I mean, the audience has definitely shifted, and from that time to today. And I'm not sure. I can't say that Hollywood feels all that confident about where the audience is headed right now. It feels like the social media and endless streaming has given the audience so much of everything that it feels like they're willing to stay at the buffet table and they don't necessarily want to look at the menu. Okay. It just go to the buffet. And so I think there's quite a bit of concern in Hollywood about that today.
Yeah, I think mostly what they give people are brands, things that they're already familiar with, and then you get more of that. You get part 2, part 3, and you get a remake, and you get a spin-off, and that sort of thing.
The brand phenomena and the franchise phenomena is an interesting thing because it isn't necessarily what drives it isn't what one necessarily thinks it is. It's if the audience feels overwhelmed, the reaction, I think, is to resort to nostalgia and what one enjoyed in the past. So the mechanism is a result of too much choice. I think that's what sustains franchises.
Yeah. Definitely, I think that's also a reason why certain things are always serialized, why a little story these days is turned into a, I don't know, 20-part series, because, once you've got something, if you start watching something, then you don't have to make a decision for the next 20 days or whatever. You just can keep watching that, and you're not going to be overwhelmed by the million of other things that you can watch.
Simplifies one's life.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in terms of mixing genres, it's interesting because not only Slipstream but also Hot Pursuit, I think, does that. So maybe that ties in with the anti-Hollywood thing that you were talking about, because Hot Pursuit turns from a comedy into a much more serious adventure type of story, and Slipstream then sort of brings in all these satirical elements.
Let me just say this about Hot Pursuit in terms of talking about Hollywood filmmaking, is that it was based on a true story that actually happened to me, not the third act, but it is based on a true story that happened to me when I was 17 years old. And that coming off of TRON, I was so beaten up by the Hollywood establishment that I wasn't sure which way to turn. And I had told the story of Hot Pursuit to the head of Disney, and he said, well, you should write that up as a little movie. And I did. But then he left Disney, and that picture then went to Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers almost made it, but they wanted one or two stars, which I couldn't get at the time. But at Warner Brothers, I met Tom Mankiewicz, who became one of the key producers on it. And then it went from there to RKO. And from there, it went to Paramount. And then Paramount partnered with RKO. And my attitude at that point was, okay, if Hollywood knows exactly what it wants, I'm willing to sit in the back seat and be told, let somebody else handle the steering. And I watched 4 different studios and multiple producers and executives take this script one way or the other, and back and forth. And that ending of the third act wasn't my original ending. My original ending was that he snuck into the hotel and he got a night with his girlfriend swimming by moonlight. And it was the only action part was when he saved the plane from being semi-hijacked to go to a different city. Okay. But, it was interesting to see that I was in no position to tell the studios at this point which way to go with the material. And so it was a lesson in watching that, how development will sweep your project along and you'll end up in a place that is all new and unexpected. So that is what happened. I mean, there were benefits to it, and I learned a lot from that experience. But that is kind of what happened to that one. And then Slipstream was another extreme screenplay experience where I say the writer didn't deliver the script, and we ended up making it up on the fly. And I have written a great number of screenplays over the years, and unfortunately, they don't get made. So for one reason or another. And so there you have it.
Yeah, one of the screenplays that you wrote, I saw, was a story of the brothers Wright. And of course, there's the aviation theme in Slipstream, and there's even the quote from McGee about touching the face of God.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you have a special affinity for the world of aviation.
Yeah, I've always loved airplanes, and I'm not a pilot, and I have a bad eye. I couldn't become a pilot. I have a tendency to see double vision, and so yeah, but they've always been just beautiful machines, and I studied the Wright brothers extensively. It's a very long and complicated history of the Wright brothers' invention of powered flight. There have been many scripts written, and it never seemed the lower budget movies happen, but it never seems to get made. And I made one. I actually the Wright brothers script was written for Coppola.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, for his company, and I continue to work on it after the studio executive that was in charge of it passed on, and
Mhm.
I'm proud of the fact that I think I cracked that screenplay with a really far out idea that is really entertaining for how to convey the power of that story. But it might be it turned out it was too far out an idea. And
Mhm.
so that project is in this limbo where, if you follow the historical facts, it's too complicated and technical. And if you take a artistic liberty that brings the whole thing to life, it will alienate the airplane aficionados that you were so willing to turn the story inside out. So that's why it doesn't get made. Which
Mhm.
and the fact of the matter is, those airplanes, the Wright brother planes, they flew at 30, 50, 60 miles an hour, and often against the headwind of 20 or 30 miles. So basically, they're hardly moving, okay? And
Mhm.
their altitudes are, in the beginning are 15, 20, 30 feet, and later on, maybe 300 feet. And it's awful hard to talk to a studio and convey to them that this is going to be as exciting as Tom Cruise in his F-15 or his F-14 or his F-18 going at, 700 miles an hour and with guns blazing. So,
Mhm.
yeah, so you get into the airplane genre and then you find out this airplane is, a flying shopping cart.
Well, I would have loved to see that. And
Yeah, I did quite a bit of work on that, including spending quite a bit of time at Kill Devil Hills in North Carolina, where they actually flew.
mhm.
And yeah, and we did generate a computer version of the Wright brother plane and did some flying footage with that. So, I mean, that's obviously the way to do it now. But yeah, it's very cool history. And it wasn't that long ago, 1913. And most Americans really are not familiar with the actual history.
Mhm.
They don't know what the Wright brothers went through, how difficult it was because they were so concerned that their patent would be stolen, that the idea of the plane would be ripped off, that they couldn't show it unless someone signed a contract, and no one would really sign a contract till they saw the plane. So they got caught in this catch 22. And yes, the first 100-foot flight was done at Kitty Hawk, but the real first public flight was done at Le Mans race course in France 4 years later.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until the American military got worried that the Europeans were going to jump ahead and get these airplanes using American ingenuity, then they freaked out. And so at the end, you actually had Orville competing with his brother Wilbur, and Wilbur was flying in France at Le Mans, and Orville was flying here. I think it was in Virginia, and the American military was saying, Orville, you better beat your brother because we want to be first with this.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it gets quite dramatic.
Oh, well, that sounds very exciting. And I think it's an interesting combination because it sounds like it's right up Coppola's alley with the stories that he's made about visionaries and people creating their own worlds, but also with your stories about technology and the way that we as humans interact with that new technology.
Yeah, and the misconceptions people have. I mean, back then, in the turn of the century, some people actually believed that humans wouldn't be able to breathe air if they were traveling faster than 30 or 40 miles an hour. So it's just crazy to read about that stuff. But, it's the fear factor. When we did TRON, there were a lot of people that just really believed that computers should never be in the hands of artists and creative people.
Mm.
And they didn't want that to happen. And I think one of the themes is that I'm a great believer that this technology should always be shared with artists and the creative community from the beginning, whether it's AI or any other digital tools. Having writers and artists visualize or dream up or think of what could happen, both positive and negative, is so valuable to the culture to do that prior to actually, I don't want to wake up every morning worried about what Mark Zuckerberg is going to surprise me with. Okay. I would rather be surprised, seeing some writer or artist create a book or a movie that deals with things that Mark Zuckerberg might come up with. Okay. Mm-hmm. But, they're engineers, and to me, the field is actually very much like traditional fine arts. When I first saw computer screens come up with visuals, I thought this is the greatest blank canvas in history, right here, right now. And there was no one around who wasn't an engineer. Okay. I mean, in the world of computer animation, there was the advantage that side of it, they had to involve some artists because they knew there were visuals. But in these other areas of AI or, social media, they really have the engineers. And the engineers, somehow they all think that they can be creative, that they can be artistic. But I've been around a whole lot of them, and never once has any of them ever asked an artist what do you think of this algorithm? Mm. But they'll be happy to contribute to your screenplay. I don't know why they feel that way, because somehow growing up watching Star Trek makes one a creative writer. I never understand how they make that leap so easily in their own minds. But it only goes one way. It doesn't seem to go the other way. So,
yeah, it's true. It's true. It's like when people tell you that, they would write a book, but they just don't have the time right now to do it. And they've never written, like a single short story. It's just a matter of time. It's not a matter of, artistic skill or vision or the actual work that goes into doing something like that.
Yeah. They leave out the agony and the ecstasy part. But, people want authenticity, and, you get these phenomenal breakout books where, some woman was a stripper, and then she writes a book and a screenplay about being a stripper, and it has so much authenticity, or Anthony Bourdain writes a book about cooking, and, in a world that can be so artificial that authenticity supersedes the ability to, really write a great book. So I think that drives that mechanism. That's why so many people write self-help books, I think, because they're saying this is my firsthand experience.
Yeah.
I know from experience, so I will share that with you.
Yeah, and I totally agree that I think this is really what's missing these days from the world of computers and artificial intelligence, to get the artist's perspective on it, because people are talking about technological things that are somehow gonna help us as humans or enhance us or maybe replace us, but they don't really have that human perspective on it, like an artist does, who offers some, who's not driven by how functional is this, but by what can I express through it? How can it help me to do something that I couldn't have done before?
Yeah, well, if you think about the 60s, we had the Beatles and Bob Dylan and other, musical talents, and they really were leading the charge,
Mm-hmm.
and behind them were the corporations that, took care of marketing the music. But one really can't point to a group of artists that are moving the zeitgeist, along.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the corporations now that are at the forefront, and the artists are in the back seat trying to catch up with the corporations. It's a completely different time.
Yeah, I mean it shows in your films. I mean, in Tron, there's the evil corporation, but also in your novel in Topeka, there's the Topeka Systems Corporation that's sort of threatening to, I don't know, distort our human experience.
Well, I think the corporations are determined to give us everything we want, and that may turn out to be a disaster. That's a weird combination. It's like the corporation says, if they want this, we'll deliver. But we may destroy ourselves, or, not completely, but to a certain degree, by just getting everything we want. And, Topeka explores, this idea that people don't want to die. They want to live forever. And they don't want any limitations on them. And death is the ultimate limitation. And so Topeka gets into this concept that, and people have explored this, is that, you can move past your body. Eventually AI, look, AI has no body. Okay. So we're talking about an entity that has no body. And then eventually we're talking about us being envious of AI because an AI doesn't have to die. I mean, some of these AIs, theoretically, they will live forever once they become successful. And so we're jealous of that. And the question is, will the AI become jealous of us having an organic body? Is this going to turn out to be the impossible dream for the AI? But if we pursue going beyond our body, eventually we're capable of living forever too, as a mind. And so the further away you get from the organic self, the body, the more the question comes up is of, can you ever really gain maturity without a body? If you have no body that learns how the world, that doesn't have to learn how the world works, how nature works, you may be indulged to become kind of puerile and juvenile forever. Because if you think what technology has done for us, in a way it is making people avoid maturity and aging. So this is what I tried to explore with Topeka, which is, the idea of, do you want people to live forever as AIs?
And there's a great line in the book where somebody says, we all have to give back our bodies at some point. They're all just loners.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. So, we're already kind of slightly predisposed to the idea that well, this is a rental, if you will, a loaner. And where do I go next?
Mm.
How does this live on, this consciousness? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you read Topeka. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I think there's a lot of I find a lot of connections with your other stories there,
Oh,
and I really had
interesting.
to. I was really laughing because on the first page there's the word slipstream, so
Yeah,
so that was fantastic.
yeah. I should have written Hot Pursuit in there somewhere too. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like find the clues.
But let's go back to Slipstream for a moment. I think one of the other ideas that I've found resonates with me in Slipstream, and I think this very topical these days, is the idea of this elite, which is sort of walled off in the museum, and they're this crazy kind of eternal party. The world around them has sort of gone up in flames or has gone through the
Yeah,
apocalypse, but they're still partying and they are discussing whether to take in anybody or whether to let anybody go away, because then people would find out about this sort of
yeah.
refuge. And I think that's a discussion that, I mean, look at our discussions these days. I found that fascinating.
The gated community. There have been studies done, anthropological studies that, what happens to a culture when they feel the end is inevitable,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a period, I think, during World War II, even, and I'll mention it in Germany, where the public finally realized this is over, and they could either just buckle down and accept the reality, or they could just say, well, let's have a party, because if we still have 5 bottles of champagne, let's party like it's 1999. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I take solace from the fact that I don't really see, people talk about, Armageddon and, the downfall of civilization, but I don't see a lot of people going absolutely crazy yet. So, except for people that think they need a car with 3,000 horsepower that has a top speed of 280
Mm-hmm.
miles an hour. But I think most of the people that buy those vehicles are desert dwellers, the rich Arabs, and they didn't really have a lot of stuff in the desert, so
Mm-hmm.
that's a different mindset. But if young people really started living like there was no tomorrow, that would hold up, and just burning through things, that would be really bad. And so, yeah, I'm not a big fan of the idea of billionaires in gated communities
Mm-hmm.
and owning their own islands and having 500-foot boats, because what good is it going to do them? I mean, if they'd be better off if the world was at a societies were at a better state of equilibrium. I mean, if everything goes to hell, those gates aren't going to do you any good.
Mm-hmm.
And, your island isn't going to do you any good. People will find you. Incidentally, this is one little footnote that's a strange thing that you might enjoy. Do you know that when Gauguin died, it took a while for the information to get back to Europe that he had died?
Mm-hmm.
And here he was dead in Tahiti. And treasure hunters, when they found out he had died, made the long journey across the Pacific to Tahiti in hopes that they were going to find drawings and sculptures that Gauguin had done.
Mm-hmm.
And one or two of them actually succeeded. They found some pieces, and the best version of that is that Gauguin went to a Chinese restaurant in Tahiti, and every day he tried to get out of not paying for his lunch by drawing and painting on the paper wrapper, And he said to the Chinese restaurant, I don't have any money. Take this, save it. One day it'll be worth a lot of money. And they must have had hundreds of those sandwich wrappers that with signed Gauguin drawings. They didn't save a single one.
Wow.
Yeah. But I like this idea that an artist back then dies and it starts this scavenger hunt to find, maybe he scribbled, there were places where he drew on the shack walls where he lived. And so people were going to the shack and ripping the boards out. So that this was,
Yeah, I think that's a very, very, just a very romantic idea that there's something that the artist left behind that can still be uncovered, like a treasure, right? That's a modern day treasure. That's not gold, but it's the lost novel of Salinger, or it's I don't know, the lost painting of Picasso or something like that.
Yeah. That's one of the problems with doing a digital film like Tron, is that you're not left with a lot of stuff because most of the props were just digital creations. And I sometimes think about what happened to the RC planes on Slipstream. I'll tell you an interesting aviation stories that we experienced. The main plane that Mark Hamill flies was called the Optica. And it's a really cool plane with its ducted fan, and it makes the air go around the spherical canopy and it goes into the ducted fan. And we had a couple models of that. And I thought, well, when we have these 8 RC models, we'll be able to do really daring flying, where we'll be able to go very close to the ground or mountains or trees and things. And it turned out to be the exact opposite, that the model makers loved their RCs so much that if I said, look, we've got 2 of these. I don't want you to destroy it, but if the worst happens and you crash into that mountain, we've got another one and we could theoretically build another one, okay? I couldn't get them to do it. The RC guy would stand there with his controller and he would get within 10 feet or 5 feet of the mountain and go, I can't do it. I can't get closer. I couldn't get. And the real pilot in the real plane would point to a real mountain and say, I'd do it, okay? And we were trekking across this barren landscape in central Turkey in Cappadocia. It was like a Werner Herzog, experience with Fitzcarraldo. And we had the Optica flying overhead, and there was a mountain. I wanted to get a shot of the Optica flying between these 2 mountains. And the 2 mountains were probably, I don't know, maybe an eighth of a mile apart. And so we radioed up to the pilot, please fly between those 2 peaks. And he said, okay, well, I'll do that. And we got the cameras ready and we were ready to do the shot. And all of a sudden he rolled the plane so that the wings were now vertical. And we got on the radio and he said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm flying it between those 2 peaks. There was a canyon over to the right of where we wanted him to go. That was probably only as wide as a room, okay? And he was going to he thought, okay, this will be a great shot. I'm going to fly between there, but I have to go vertical to get through there. And that was a perfect example that the real pilots in the real planes were willing to do the most incredible stuff. And the guys with the RC planes would chicken out every time. So, yeah, it was an interesting learning curve.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's the charm of hands-on filmmaking, right? That's the charm of doing stuff not digitally, but on location with real things.
And again, it speaks to the theme of limits. If you have the remote control, you have a whole new set of limits, or you're free of the former limitations. And then who would have expected this new limitation to occur?
Yeah, people worried about the beautiful models.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple other things. I mean, Bill Paxton and Bob Peck really became buddies, and
Hmm.
it was unusual. It was great. I mean, they hung out when we were shooting. They were obviously together following the story, and then when we weren't shooting, the two of them were hanging out and traveling
Hmm.
around to various locations. They were a great team, and working with Gary Kurtz was I couldn't have had a better partner. I will say I some people said, "Oh, he's on the set every day." And doesn't
Hmm.
that really bother you as the director? And it was hell no. I was so happy to have him there, and we talked about everything. And the film really was a collaboration between the two of us. And he couldn't have been a better person to work with. And he and Mark Hamill were really close friends, so that
Hmm.
was great to be around that energy. And Mark Hamill is just a phenomenal actor and a great person. There's no other way to say it. And I've never been around anybody with more energy than Mark Hamill. I mean, it just doesn't stop. He's always going. He's always trying things. He's just a really amazing guy. And all the other British actors, it's wonderful. Robbie Coltrane and F. Murray Abraham and Ben Kingsley, and I mean, some of the actors are obviously not British, but it was a very professional crew. And
Hmm.
in England, their attitude is a little more based on craft and less on ego.
Hmm.
That I'm doing a job, and yeah, that was a good experience. So it did make me regret that we didn't have more time to work on the script to take advantage
Hmm.
of how good the actors were.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Well, what happened with the release of the film? I mean, it was barely released. I mean, it did have a theatrical run in England, I think, but none in America, and it didn't have one in Germany or I think a lot of other countries. It was a direct-to-video release.
they couldn't get a distribution deal, and I think it was tough for the company behind it to make a deal. And
Hmm.
I don't know the specifics. I really wasn't involved in that. But yeah, it was disappointing that it didn't happen. And then, so often with independent films like this, the ownership chain gets a little
Hmm.
complicated because there are various investors. The money doesn't all come from one source. So I think that makes it more difficult to make distribution deals.
Hmm.
And yeah, so to this day, the release of it has been not, standard. And
Hmm.
I couldn't really tell you where things went or why they got there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, there's no real restoration of the film available. I have a DVD which is in full frame, and you can sense it's a good-looking film with all the landscapes and the sunsets and everything. But in full frame, it just it doesn't
Yeah,
look good.
yeah, and it's people complain about making films for studios, but the advantage of a studio is that, the film knows where it's at
Mm,
forever. And with independent films, once it goes out there, you're never sure who's doing what with the copyright or the
mm,
film, in terms of what it looks like. So yeah, that's kind of tough. But these films are like children, they have
mm,
their own lives and they go out into the world, and some of them have, lucky fates, and some of them are ill fated. And
mm,
like I said, Slipstream it's always the group of us. It was kind of a hard luck group. So it's not all that surprising
mm,
that, and Gary Kurtz, he passed on a while ago. So whatever influence he had on which direction the release was going. That's gone now too. So
when was the last time that you saw Slipstream?
I have a DVD, and it's been years now. It's been years. It's funny looking at films, decades later, how different they look, what one's become a completely different audience to your own film. And things that you wanted to change 30 years ago, now one likes, and things, and vice versa. So, and there's also the melancholy aspect of knowing these people as friends and coworkers, and, now they're gone. Yeah, because I worked with Frank Tidy on Hot Pursuit too, and he was a great guy, and it gets to you. It pulls on your heartstrings.
Yeah, it's true. Now, did the release of the film, or the fact that the film wasn't really widely released, did that impact your career?
Well, my career is a one-off. My career was primarily as a screenwriter. That's how I made my living. And I've probably written close to 20 scripts, and I was paid well for a lot of them. So I was always competing with TRON, and that's a very challenging film to try to top or come close to. And particularly as it has, gained more significance over the years. And I also think that as a filmmaker, I was more inclined to work with a team that I knew. I mean, I developed TRON independently and had a whole team, and we all went out to Disney together. And there was my extended family. And Hollywood, conquers by the divide and conquer approach, which is one of the most difficult things to have in Hollywood, is to maintain a company and a team with the same players. And I was never a big fan of being the hired gun, where, one group of people comes up with the idea, another group develops the movie, another group then develops the movie. That happens 2 or 3 times over 7 years. And then an outside director is brought in, and it becomes this hodgepodge from who's got the vision, and, who's really the creative wellspring of this thing. And that some directors I know really like that. They like being the hired gun. And I that wasn't very appealing to me. And so instead of working with me, it was the two extremes, either working with a team that I knew and that we developed it together, or just going solo and writing a script, maybe with a writing partner. And but the middle ground wasn't that appealing to me. And so I didn't really pursue as hard as I could have the idea of another directing gig. And there were also, after Slipstream, there were also some health things I had to take care of that I found I didn't have the stamina for live action directing. And those were eventually taken care of. And but by that point, once you're out of the loop in Hollywood as a director and you haven't directed a movie for 10 years, there's a whole new crop of directors that have moved in. So that's the way that progressed. And I take a lot of satisfaction from the fact that my work is being recognized now over the years. There was a period where I think I made the mistake with TRON, unfortunately, of making a lot of people in Hollywood who felt they were the hippest people in the world. They found out they weren't. And Tron made them feel, for want of a better word, dumb. Okay. And they particularly didn't want to feel that way from a Disney film. That Disney wasn't supposed to be avant-garde. And so I think there was a sort of, there weren't that many fans of Tron and Steve Lisberger early on. And that has grown over the years. And that's been very satisfying. And I'm surprised that, you know, the so many of these ideas I came up with, they seem more relevant than ever. And at the time, I wasn't sitting down thinking, oh, in, you know, 30 or 40 years, this is going to be truer than it is right now. But that has played out that way. So that's been satisfying.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of pioneering works, that they're done because they're interesting and they're kind of new, but not because you sort of imagine this is what the world is going to be like in 30 years or something. But when you go back to them, you kind of recognize just the journey that the world has taken from there. And it's not only the when you look at the story itself of Tron and your ideas about it, but also the whole process, like you said. I mean, this is something that was so unusual at the time, and I've recently rewatched the making of Tron, and I kind of thought, wow, this was unusual. But these days, I mean, every film is made like this, right? I mean,
I know, it's pretty funny. But Rousseau, you know, the French philosopher, created a model with 4 parts to it, and of how these things move through time. And a gentleman named McConnell, I think McDonald, a film teacher at Santa Barbara. I can't get his name right off the top of my head. But he divided it up even more specifically in terms of entertainment, in terms of there's a founding phase, and then the law phase, and then the cynicism phase, and then the fool arrives. And, you know, so the Westerns explored this. You get the frontier, and with the frontier, in order to survive on the frontier, you have to forfeit some morality. You know, you're not going to conquer the West if you refuse to fight the Indians. Okay, so there's going to be some bad stuff happening. But then the law comes in, and then you get the sheriff Westerns, where it's about imposing the law. And then eventually the law becomes corrupt, and then you get the PI, the private investigator. You get, you know, Philip Marlowe. And, you know, eventually things get so corrupt and cynical that the only person that can be want to try to change things and be a hero is the fool. And that's the young, you know, Luke Skywalker, who is like, I can still do it, you know, but all the experienced people know it's too late. And so with Tron, it was a period where it was kind of a frontier. And it was, and I realized this in retrospect, that was what was exciting, was the blank page, the frontier. But then, you know, what follows is, it turns out that when the law starts building towns in the frontier, they really don't want the frontiersmen around. They want to think the town they built, everything is pious and perfect. And they don't want the frontiersmen to come back and say, you know, this town we built here, I had to kill Native Americans so that you could live here. They don't want him around. Okay. It's better, you know, if he's gone. Okay. So there was a little bit of that feeling with, it took 13 years to get from Tron to Toy Story. Think about that. For 13 years, that's almost a generation, a better part of half a generation. And so I think they didn't really want me around either at that point. And but then we've gone through these other phases, and the cynical phase and the fool phase. Things have become so cynical that and now I think with AI, people are talking about it so they can have the next frontier.
Hmm.
AI is this next frontier. And that's why, there's a big concern about what the morality is going to be. But I think it's somewhat less of a frontier because of how Hollywood has explored the AI character, whether it's Hal or the Terminator or Byron or, Tron. There has been some exploration. And the question is, which one of these is going to be most right?
Hmm. Well, let's hope it's not the Terminator.
Yeah, I don't think it will be the Terminator, to tell you the truth. I think it's more likely that the AI will give us too much of what we want.
Hmm.
And instead of showing up with a minigun and trying to blow us away,
Hmm.
I think it's pretty easy to pacify humans if you give them what they want.
Yeah, I think it's more of a Matrix-like idea. I mean, in the Matrix, they were sort of feeding off the energy of humans, but the general idea was that they create a world for the humans that they would accept and just be at peace with, and then the machines can do whatever they want, right?
Yeah. So I think did you ever read This Perfect Day by,
Uh,
what's his name? Ira Levin, I think.
no.
Okay, he wrote, I think it's Rosemary's Baby. He worked on
Hmm.
that. So look up a book, This Perfect Day, and it really is the seed kernel for what the Matrix became.
Hmm.
And then it was rewritten as a screenplay by so many companies that the copyright became so messed up that nobody could ever make it again.
Hmm.
At one point it was offered to me, and it's for revisions, and it's interesting. And then before that, in the early '60s, there was a book called Simulacrum, and
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
was really and there was that German film, actually, something on a wire. I forget
Yeah.
the
World
name.
on a Wire by
World on a Wire.
Rainer
It's
Werner
interesting.
Fassbinder. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to go back and see these things. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's easier to give us what we want than it is to kill us.
Yeah. So do you have any new projects that you're working on? Are there still films that you would want to make?
I have a file with a bunch of stories that sort of haunt me that I'm still trying to resolve. And it's in a way, it becomes more difficult, I find, in some ways, different limitations. I know so much about screenwriting, but maybe I know too much. And the
Hmm.
checklist of things that I demand of the material to include and have in it before I commit to it has gotten too large.
Hmm.
And when I was young and naive, the fool, it was easier to rush into these things and not think about how this would all work out. But no, I did work on and off on Topeka for years,
Hmm.
and that was the major writing effort. And I do think of Tron ideas, but I vacillate between I don't want to write about more of the future of technology, and then start writing something else, and then I say, no, I should go back to writing about the future of technology, and I bounce back and forth between those two things. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going to happen in terms of what I'll write next, but I do kick things around. That doesn't stop.
Yeah, I would definitely love to see another book, and I mean, another movie would be cool too. But
Yeah,
um,
it would. I guess maybe I'm waiting for the technology to become so easy that I can just sit at home now and make it happen with my keyboard. And
yeah,
we're not quite there yet, but I think it's getting there.
yeah, I think give it 2 years, and then I think we'll be at that point.
Yeah, so maybe that'll be my fate. I don't know. Kind of
Uh,
interesting to think about.
yeah,
So.
definitely. Yeah, and there's a new Tron movie coming out, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, Tron Ares will be coming out October 10th, and that's super exciting. And I mean, there's the Tron ride in Disney World in Florida, which is just the most amazing thing ever. And I highly recommend it. I like to say I've been on the Tron ride since I made the movie, and it's been a roller
Mhm.
coaster. And but now there's an actual Tron ride, and it's beautiful beyond belief. Has to be the most beautiful coaster in the world with at night with Daft Punk music playing. Wow,
Wow.
it's yeah. So it's difficult. You get in this position where you say, I can't come close to topping what's happened with Tron.
Mm,
So are you really going to try? And
mm,
it's in a way one becomes intimidated by one's past, one's youth.
mm. Yeah, but when you look on Letterbox on the at the reviews about Slipstream, there's actually somebody who suggests doing a sequel to Slipstream. He would love to see another story set in the world of Slipstream. So,
Well, it would be a lot easier to do some far out things now with digital than, I mean, we were practical and and like I say, you look at what they can do and it kind of blows my mind because I wish I had a time machine where I could take some of this footage that's on YouTube and go back 30 years and show it to
mm,
people because I would like to see what their response is, but there's this
mm,
strange mechanism where young people grow up seeing this as the norm and they take it for granted and it's not a big deal.
mm,
And they have no conception of how difficult it was to make these visuals and so when an older filmmaker is looking at a younger audience and he realizes that the things that he now thinks are so incredible that can be done, if he shows them to these young people, this young audience, they go, that's no big deal.
mm.
I grew up on that stuff. They take it, completely for granted. So it's just amazing to see what's happening. And everybody's waiting for the AI to show up and say, well, I made a movie and here it is. And
Yeah.
I made it last night and it really only took 10 minutes. And and if you don't like that one, I can make another one in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And if you don't like that character in the lead, just click on this character and he'll be the lead.
Hmm. Yeah.
And wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no question we're going there.
Yeah.
So
But let's see how satisfying it's going to be, right? I mean,
there's a YouTube video of two AIs talking about Tron.
really.
Yeah, and they're having a discussion about, well, agent programs in Tron, would they really do this for the user the way the film suggests, or maybe they would do that? I know I would do this instead of that. And so there's this closed loop where you have two AIs talking about the AI programs in Tron and the MCP. Wow.
That's weird.
Yeah. And the users are completely, extraneous to the whole little world now
Mm,
circling around itself.
mm.
Yeah. All right, Christian. I think
Well,
you've got just about everything I wish I was in Salzburg. I could use a beer and Weisswurst.
Yeah, that would be great.